This is Steve Goldsmith. We're continuing our profiles of innovative mayors and their leadership styles. And today we're talking to Mayor Malloy of Stamford, Connecticut about his effort with respect to sustainable development and economic development. Mayor, we want to ask you some questions today about some of your leadership initiatives, particularly those that involve reuse of the waterfront and then a whole connection with green buildings and sustainable development. So let me start with this question. You know, all the things you've got to do, you've got police issues and school issues and the like. How did you nominate these issues, economic development and sustainable development, to your public and make the case why they're important?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I've served as mayor for a long period of time. I'm just completing my 12th year, about to begin my 14th year. So you get to do lots of issues over that period of time, and some of those will be highlighted at different stages of your mayoralty. Economic development, of course, is jobs, and that is the pocketbook. And citizens believe that their mayor, particularly in a city that is a job producer, they believe their mayor should be involved in grooming and protecting the local economy and, quite frankly, in building it. So that was kind of a natural fit. But being a mayor of an old city in New England, an old industrial city, my job was a little bit different than it is in some places and has some similarities for other mayors. The reality is we have a lot of brownfield sites. Most of the easily developed property in Stamford was developed a long time ago, and what's left is kind of the vestiges of the building of America, the tool and die industry, the manufacturing industry. And so we began to invest years ago in a plan to bring about market-driven redevelopment of brownfield sites. In fact, in the 1990s, during the Clinton-Gore administration, we applied for designation as a showcase community. That designation was supposed to make the federal government give you a little money, but make all the agencies coordinate internally to help an economic revitalization of a brownfield area. Of course, that administration changed. There was de-emphasis on the federal side, but the early work that we did, which was to say the following. That the easiest way to develop or redevelop brownfields is to maximize the value in that property, to think positively about density changes and zoning changes that might drive up property values in that area, and to do other things that might drive up property values in a brownfield zone. For instance, better transportation, better road system. We've certainly invested in that and are in the process of building an $80 million new road system into a portion of the old industrial part of our city. Lowering crime, interestingly enough, has been hugely important. You know, here as I've told you, I'm in my 12th year as mayor. Crime continues to be 60% lower than it was in 1995 in a city where the population has increased by 14,000 people. That's pretty significant. And by the way, in a city in which over 30% of the inhabitants identified themselves as having been born in another country in the 2000 census, that number will go up when we get around to doing another census. So concentrating on economic development and understanding that brownfield remediation was part of the equation in an older industrial city came very naturally. And then I have to add that over that same period of time, I became more and more involved in the climate protection, climate change drive, and quite frankly, remediating brownfields or smart development really dovetails very well into what has now become the green movement. And I think Stamford has been a leader in the green movement. We certainly have set very high goals. Recently we announced that we want to recycle 40% of all of our garbage. Now there are communities that are doing more than that, and we want to reach that by 2010. But most cities are recycling about 6% of their garbage. We're converting heating systems, lighting systems. We're going into microgeneration, excuse me. So we're taking on a lot of the environmental issues as we work on brownfield remediation.
Do you connect these themes to the public? Do they have an overarching framework when you make the case to the public?
I think the chief job of a mayor is communicator. And you know, we really, the name should be in the title. And quite frankly, America's most successful mayors are those mayors that find it easiest to communicate their goals, their aspirations, make them into community goals and community aspirations, and continue to the kind of the support effort on behalf of the community to move the community to making real progress. You know, I referenced a road system. You know, I began that project 12 years ago. It's just going into construction now. But people understand the significance of that new road system, paralleling 95, but really allowing traffic to get in and out of the rail station much more easily and simply without having to go into the central business district. They now understand, well, gee, that's the key into opening up this old industrial area that never would have been redeveloped unless we lowered crime, unless we built or committed to a new road system, unless we did an underpass that really choked traffic into that neighborhood down to a single lane. Those are the kinds of things that you've got to communicate, you've got to convince, you've got to move, and when you do it, you actually get results.
It feels like that the brownfields case is in some ways easier to make than LEED certification green buildings, because there's a cost associated with some developer. Did you receive a kind of pushback, and how did you overcome the resistance?
Well, we're moving rapidly now into requiring certification, and we waited on that because we didn't want to put ourselves at an economic disadvantage to other communities who were not moving in that direction. But we're moving solidly in that direction because the long-term benefits to the local community as well as to the world in which we live are really quite undeniable. And I want to say another thing. It's also, we know more about it. We're building better buildings to work in and to live in. And quite frankly, requiring that is the equivalent of requiring fire safety equipment. You know, it just makes too much sense not to do it. But you know, this whole issue about what you should or shouldn't require. One of the things I'm very proud of in Stamford is we require that 10% of all new multifamily housing units be set aside as affordable. Now, there were, you know, people howled about that when we started to move in that direction 12 years ago. But what we ultimately convinced everyone is that would be built into the price of the product. That developers would understand that that's just one more item we have to price. And if that means that we're not going to build this development this year and it may take 3 years to build it, so be it as far as we're concerned. We're not in the business of maximizing everyone's profit. We're in the business of allowing everyone to make a profit, but also taking care of all of our citizens. And the idea of affordable housing availability in a community, which is transportation constrained, is we need to make sure that we have a cross-section of people living in our community that can fully serve the needs of the community. We're being very aggressive on that particular point, but it's now been built into the pricing over a period of time. It's just simply understood as something you have to do. I think green standards will do that, and will give incentives. One of the new programs, which we haven't passed through the legislative body, but is to give discounts on building permits according to the level of LEED certification you have. You know, if we can save you $250,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 on a total green cost of $2 or $3 or even $20 million, it's not insignificant what we're willing to sacrifice to make sure that you build a better building.
So just a couple final questions. What were the most significant obstacles that you had to overcome as you raised the level of this agenda and kind of implemented your vision?
You know, it's a good question, and that's probably a question better answered by an observer than a participant. This is what I would say. I think we had to convince people in Stamford that we had to take bold action to build the kind of Stamford that they wanted to live in, that they aspired Stamford to be. We had to regularly communicate what that vision was, and by the way, be willing to modify that vision as circumstances would otherwise require. You know, when I was elected in 1995, if you told me oil would be $100 a barrel today, I would have, you know, thought you were crazy. Those kinds of changes. We live in an electricity constrained area, probably the most constrained area when it comes to electricity. Transportation is a huge problem. So if we're going to resolve those problems, we have to work locally as well as a state, as well as with a national body. You need to communicate that to your citizens, and I think that's really the most important thing. I'm sorry to be repeating myself, but I don't think you can overemphasize the necessity of having clear goals established, holding yourselves to those goals, but certainly communicating them to your citizens.
Good. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you.